The most moving moment I know of your story, your mother blurted out while you were watching a TV program. And I think a lot of us are thinking about family in different ways or more intensely. People are actually using the phone these days for phone calls, not just text messages and that. And that started, of course, the unexpected loss of your father, but it started this series of travels with your mother that, as I understand, continues even recently in Russia. But tell us that moment and how you made this new family travel partnership happen.
Sure. So my parents and I have been traveling together for as long as I can remember. Like even when growing up, we would travel pretty much, I forget, two, three, four times a year. And of course, we couldn't travel internationally that much because back in before 2010 and whatnot, I mean, my parents neither had that much money and flights were expensive and all of that. And then starting from 2011, we started traveling extensively internationally. And unfortunately, as you might be aware, my father passed away in early 2018. And I was in India where my mom lives at that time. And just a few days after dad passed away, we were watching TV. And as always, there was some travel show. I mean, that's where I get my personality from, I guess. And my mom was watching this television show and they were talking about the Silk Route and they were showing Bukhara. And my mom just blurted out something to the effect of, well, these were places your father and I wanted to do visit in our retirement, but that's not going to happen any longer because as I said, my mom lives in India and Uzbekistan is like only a 2.5 hour flight from Delhi. So it's very, very close. And that sort of just planted this little germ in my head. And I told her, Mom, there's no reason why we can't go any longer. And so she's like, no, 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 we can't travel without your father. And it did require quite a bit of convincing, obviously. But, we did this trip, which started in Khiva, which is, as you know, in Western Uzbekistan. And we overlanded across Uzbekistan from Khiva to Bukhara to Samarkand, then crossed over to Tajikistan, and then we did the Pamir Highway, where, as you can imagine, seeing then she was 63, a 63-year-old Indian woman dressed like an Indian woman wearing a salwar and kameez, like people were like, what? Like that's not your typical tourist profile because everyone's mostly a young Westerner, and the few
Yeah.
elderly travelers are also like older European travelers, and they're like dressed in Jack Wolfskin and like your typical outdoors gear. And this one, this petite Indian woman, and everyone was just like completely shocked seeing my mom in such a remote part of the world. So we did the Pamir Highway, and then
I'm
arrived in
guessing she has
Kyrgyzstan.
that presence that I think a number of Indian women have of when they walk into a room, it's clear that they are the boss. And I'm sure she was noticed, and you're the little helper along the way.
Well, I mean, I was mistaken as my mom's tour guide in Uzbekistan because,
Okay.
Uzbek people do have,
Yeah.
features that can be very similar to Indian people, and everyone assumed that I was just my mom's local tour guide. But what is amazing is that, there is quite a bit of friction between the Tajiks and the Kyrgyz people. And our car, we were switching cars at the crazy border on the Pamir Highway, the mountain border
Mhm.
between the two countries. I can't remember the name of the exact mountain pass, but they were giving a really hard time to our Tajik car, and the Kyrgyz were just like, "Oh, you need to open your car and show this and show that. We need to check you for drugs." And my mom was like, "What's going on? Why are these people giving our driver such a hard time?" And I explained to her, and she just walked into the guard's post and just screamed like, "It's like, listen, Mister, I've been sitting here for 30 minutes. We're sitting at 4,500 meters. I'm 63. I'm about to pass out. You better let these guys go now." And this guy was like, he was just trying to blow her off, and he just looks at her and said, "Okay, okay, ma'am. Okay, okay. Namaste, ma'am. Namaste, ma'am." And in 10 minutes, we were off. So, yeah, she did throw her weight around a couple of times. But yeah, we arrived in Kyrgyzstan for the World Nomad Games, which was just, again, this awesome, authentic experience. And yeah, so it was, I mean, I think we continued that streak that started with when my father was still around. And we decided that we would continue it, and yeah, that's the story.
Someone wanting to initiate those kind of discussions with their parents, maybe both parents, or they're fortunate enough to have both parents still with them, or maybe one recently lost. How would especially I think a lot of parents of that generation are very reticent, and like you said, oh, don't fuss over me. There's no way we can do all that. how would you, again, across cultures, but a lot of similarities, how would you start those discussions and gently motivate someone maybe a little reluctant to embrace that kind of, it doesn't need to be the Pamir Highway, but a travel if they're not as used to it or circumstances suddenly changed.
Right. So the Pamir Highway, I mean, it took a lot of, a lot of trips before we came to the Pamir Highway. Like I wouldn't recommend pushing anyone. I mean, it is a stunning part of the world, but it is quite tough. And so our first trip together was actually a pretty simple country. We went to Turkey. We started in Istanbul, but also, it was not just Istanbul, which is where most people head to. Yeah, I mean, I think I told my parents at that time, like, hey, I mean, do you want to see a little more of Turkey, or do you just want to stay in Istanbul? And they were like, sure. I mean, if it's safe, if it's doable, if there's good hotels and whatnot, if it's doable, let's do it.
Mhm.
And I think you need to. It's just like I'm sorry to use that analogy of like like boiling a frog in a pot of water. It's like you gradually increase the temperature, and so you start off with Istanbul, which is very comfortable, very familiar, very beautiful, quite touristy. Then you go to Cappadocia, which in 2011 was not so touristy, but still touristy and comfortable. And then before you know it, we're just rambling through this mountain road at 2 in the morning because my dad couldn't read the map properly and no one spoke English and we were freaking out, but having the time of our lives and laughing. So it takes time. I mean, you can't, it's kind of like, you have to start off slow. And before this, I mean, there were years and years and years of traveling domestically in America and in India and doing trips to neighboring countries like Canada when we were living in America, Nepal and Bhutan when we were living in India. So we started small and then gradually sort of ratcheted it up to the Pamir Highway.
Fantastic. And Furkan is saying he loves your quarantine hair. Oh, that's great.
It's
You're
not too often
styling
that you
well.
see hair that long.
Lots
Yeah.
of Premier Highway on the short list. Miles is asking about the World Nomad Games, a little bit about that experience and how to make it happen.
So the World Nomad Games, ever since its inception, I believe, I'm trying to remember if the one we attended was the second or the third one. It happens once every 2 years, so technically there should be one happening this year, which I don't think is going to happen because of COVID-19. The first few editions, and again, I can't remember if it's two or three, happened in Kyrgyzstan. In this particular, there are two locations around. Well, it's not in Bishkek. It's quite far from Bishkek. It's God. What's the name of the big lake in Kyrgyzstan? My brain just blanked out,
Issyk?
Stefan.
Uh,
Issyk, thank you.
yeah.
Well, I was thinking Karakol, which is in the mountains. So
Yeah.
they have this big stadium on the shores of Issyk where they have a lot of the competitions, but they also have this location in the mountains and which is about 50 kilometers away, where they have a lot of the archery games, and they also have this cultural fair where people from the various nomadic cultures, so it's not just Kyrgyz people, but Kyrgyz, Mongolians, people from the Altai Republic in Russia and elsewhere, they set up tents with their cuisines and their costumes and their games and stuff. Unfortunately, this year, I mean, not unfortunately, it's probably not as fun as being in Kyrgyzstan, but the games were supposed to be held in Turkey. So I'm not sure if those were supposed to be held in Istanbul or somewhere, in the interior of the country. But I somehow feel that having the games in a place that's not in the middle of nowhere, like surrounded by snow-capped mountains, kind of
Mhm.
takes away the authenticity and just the
Yeah.
awesomeness of the game. It was supposed to take place this year, but I don't think that's going to happen any longer.
I see. And Ryan S is saying that his parents watched too many episodes of Locked Up and Abroad. So he has, and James Martin echoed that comment that it's hard to wean parents that think, well, they'll end up in a foreign prison if they leave. In his case, the U.S.
Mhm.
That yeah, that's an uphill battle, and I don't know. Sometimes maybe you create a fake like lottery contest, and suddenly you say your parents won an all expensive paid trip to London or whatever, and they can't turn that down, and then they get going that way. How about Guinea? So in West Africa, I think destinations are getting a little more explored by EPSers. I'd say I would wager many of the EPS visitors to Guinea have not gone past Conakry, and you have. So let's talk about what there is to see and experience.
Sure. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably go against EPS orthodoxy. Guinea is one of my favorite countries in Africa. And every time I say this, everyone's like, are we talking of the same country, or is this some other country that you're talking about? And the thing is, I think a lot of people don't quite like Guinea because they end up in Conakry. In Conakry, I hate being uncharitable about a city. It really isn't a very pretty city. I mean, if you go during the dusty season, the dry season, it is horrendously dusty and just dirty. And I'm sure when it rains, all of that dust becomes mud. And then there's the corruption, there's the police. And when, I think a lot of people went recently, it was just around the coup and the disputed elections. And so it was just like madness. Like you couldn't take your camera out because you'd be afraid that some police would come and grab your camera, shake you down for a bribe and whatnot. So I'm kind of happy I only spent just one day in Conakry, and the following morning, I got picked up in this, like basically a set place, which I had chartered out for myself. And we drove out to the Fouta Djallon region, which is, I think a lot of people refer to it as West Africa's water tower, because that's where the Niger River and other big rivers originate. It's this absolutely beautiful, lush, green, mountainous region with these stunning gorges, like massive gorges where you have cascading waterfalls. There is this waterfall called Kambadaga Waterfalls. It's a two-tiered waterfall. During the rainy season, you can actually see four waterfalls, so two in parallel and then another two at the bottom. And I was lucky I was there just after the rainy season. Like it was again one of those views where you just, you kind of stare at it and you're like, if I died right now in here, my life is worth it. It's been a life well spent because it was just so beautiful. And of course, I mean, so many beautiful mountain views, not a corrupt police officer in sight. Everyone was so friendly. It's a very Fulani heavy area, so the Fulani people live there. And these are typically not the Fulanis who are livestock herders, but these are Fulanis who are mostly farmers there. So it's just this beautiful, bucolic landscape where on one hand you can experience this gentle village life where everyone's so friendly and kind and welcoming. And then of course there's just these epic landscapes like waterfalls and canyons and lush rainforests. So yeah, it was just such a stunning experience. And yeah, I can't recommend it more. I can't recommend it enough to anyone. It's just one of the most magical places I've visited.
Oh, I guess Kevin Bryan's contradicting me. He's saying, is Guinea really unpopular? That's my assumption or my view of comments I see, that it's one that, or maybe gets the short visits, I would say. And he's recommending also Fouta Djallon mountainous area. So sounds like he's explored as well. And I felt even just flying over the I don't know how to pronounce correctly, the Biagos archipelago in Guinea-Bissau. That seemed to me like, give it 10, 20 years, it could be a huge ecotourism destination. But I did not take the time to explore that. And what's the Ile de Los?
So Ile de Los is just off the coast of Conakry.
Okay.
I didn't have time to go to Ile de Los. So I had one day in Conakry, and I just wanted to walk around. And I think if you don't take your camera out, it's fine. I mean, people are actually really friendly, and I don't speak a whole lot of French, but even with my really bad, I don't even call it petit French. It's more like pity French, because I literally ask people to have pity on me and speak what little English they can. But even with my pity French, I had a great time walking around, but I was very careful. I did not take my camera out in Conakry. Yes, but I did not get a chance to go to Ile de Los, unfortunately.
Remember my first night in Conakry, I stayed at something on booking.com. It was run by a Turkish guy, and he was concerned because my flight was in fairly late. So this is probably nine at night. And the only restaurant likely open was at the Chinese hotel a few blocks away. So he's like, "Oh, I'm concerned for your safety, so I'm sending security with you." And he sent this like 12-year-old boy that works for him. And he was a great guide, but I thought, is this really the security guard? But we had a nice little walk to the Chinese hotel. And in a lot of countries in Africa, I'll stop by the Chinese hotels just to get some quick vegetables for my meals. But
but you get good Indian food in most of these hotels.
It's either the Chinese restaurant or the Four Cheese Pizza restaurant. I figure sometimes, especially if you're at night, out there
Mhm.
looking. There's a question about are you doing 193, and if so, why?
So, well, that's a great question. I mean, yes. Well, God knows where the world of travel will be heading after COVID-19 and how soon we'll be able to travel in that sort of way we used to travel in the past. I mean, there's just all these questions. But, well, why am I trying for 193? So, first of all, I think I had this realization a couple of, when was it? 2017, I think, I think I was on or 2016 or 2017, when I was somewhere in my 80s. I'm like, interesting. I mean, there's 193 or 197, depending on how it countries. So it's like 110 or more countries. And that's when I also started becoming active on Instagram. And even before I joined EPS, I was actually told about EPS by someone who's no longer on Facebook, unfortunately, Lawrence Williams, who's a British traveler. And so even before EPS, I connected with a lot of world travelers on Instagram, and so one of the first people who motivated me was Sal Lavallo, where uh, yeah, he was at that time somewhere in his 150s or somewhere quite close to his 193. And with all respect, I mean, I love Sal, and we've met in person. He's a fantastic guy. I think what really sort of motivated me was like, wow, you're just such an ordinary, nice guy. You're not a millionaire. You're not a trustafarian. You're not someone who is, being propelled by sponsorships or anything, but you're traveling. You're a very normal guy with this motivation. And so it just really made me think that a normal person like myself could also try and visit all countries. But other than that, I mean, I do think that every country has something unique, something beautiful, and even countries which are not very loved by a lot of people. So I know, like, we mentioned Guinea. Another country is Brunei. And many people were like, yeah, Brunei, it's just like, spend a day and go in and go out. I actually love Brunei because they have the stunning rainforest, which requires, I think, I can't remember, it's like 3 or 4 different means of conveyance to get there. But
Mm.
what I try and do is, like, I think that every country has something to offer, and I want to see it with my own eyes, experience it with my own soul, listen, taste, feel it, rather than rely on what filter the media or someone else is using to describe those countries. So there's both of that. There's the ambitious side, the ambition of being one of those few people to make it to all countries. There's also something, more philosophical about me experiencing and seeing these countries with my own eyes, and yeah, rather than through the filter of others.
We've got all your groupies pointing out that they think this is the most attended live stream of EPS's history so far. So that chalks up to your store power, as one says. So it's great. We've got such a group of Debjeet fans joining in, and I want to continue another one that I actually went incidentally to Central African Republic, and uh, my transit visa in Cameroon was expiring, and Cam Air canceled my flight to. I was heading to Gabon, and even Cam Air negotiating with immigration officials, they would not extend it. So I had to leave within a few hours, and there were 2 flights, Bangui or Paris. And so I went there and I spent 2 nights, and then was able to resume my schedule. I think you've explored more. So when I get my do over to go out and about, tell me about CAR.
Mhm. So unfortunately, I mean, I haven't been to Zanga Sanga, which is the national park in the southwest of CAR. I know that several people from EPS have done the overland trip from Cameroon, and they're now, well, before COVID-19, there were flights, more regular flights going from Bangui to Zanga Sanga. But I spent quite a bit of time, I think it was 3 days and 2 nights in and around Bangui. Again, Bangui is one of those cities where when I first flew in, I was expecting a war zone. I mean, it's not, it's still quite gnarly. I mean, you have the neighborhood, PK Sank near the airport, which has been a flashpoint for inter-religious, inter-community violence, and it still continues to be. So it's not a walk in the park. But so the first day, again, you go to the hotel. It was a big Lebanese hotel. It was not in downtown. It was a couple of kilometers away from downtown. and they're like, oh my God, like don't go outside the hotel. Like if you want to take a walk, just walk where our security guards can see you. And I felt like such a doofus, like doing this little march 10 steps this way, retracing. I was like, dude, this is not how I see a city and see a country. So I just, and this guy wouldn't let me. I said, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna grab a taxi, go for dinner. And I scooted, I just walked. And the thing is, like, when I do think I have a fairly decent sixth sense. And as I started walking, as I started kind of like, seeing people and kind of picking up the vibes, it reminded me of any small, like just small random town in Africa. Like I lived for 4.5 years in the city called Kisumu in Western Kenya, and Bangi so reminded me of Kisumu. You have sort of this really old colonial architecture from the 1930s and stuff still preserved. A lot of markets. People are just, very chill, very kind. Again, don't take your camera out because there's security forces and police and UN soldiers everywhere. Be discreet. I took a ton of photos. I walked all over town. Took a boat, a pirogue, to the river, and the guy, he took me almost all the way to the other side, which is actually the town of Zongo in DRC. We paddled around. Yeah, we paddled around the river, watched the sunset. Then the next day, the guy at my hotel organized a taxi for me, just a normal taxi, not a 4x4, nothing fancy, just a normal red taxi in Bangi, and went to Boali Falls, which is a couple of hours outside of the city. And again, a lot of roadblocks, and I was expecting that not get hassled nonstop. Nothing. I mean, the soldiers surprisingly spoke a little bit of English, and they were just so delighted to see a tourist because the only foreigners they tend to see are UN soldiers. And when I get to Boali Falls, that day was a bunch of Nepalese and Bhutanese UN peacekeepers who were there with their families, and they just flipped when they saw like another brown person. And they start speaking Hindi. They were like, "A tourist? Like, what are you doing here?" Like, and they were just like grabbing selfies and just like, like they were just hugging me, and just they just got so overwhelmed seeing a tourist, and that too a tourist from South Asia in this forest, in this waterfall in the middle of a rainforest in one of the world's least touristed countries. So yeah, it was a very chilled, very very low key trip, and it was not scary at all. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And also, I mean, if for those that follow me on Instagram know that I love sort of like, I love the dramatic, I love storytelling. And so just like descending into Bangi, like it's just, if you have a clear day as you're going over the equatorial rainforest of the Congo, it's just uninterrupted green. You see a few slivers of, these massive rivers. If you're lucky, you will see the snow-capped Rwenzori Mountains as you're, coming over the Uganda DRC border. And this is the scenery for hours, for several hours. And all of a sudden, as the plane starts descending, there's nothing. It's just green, green, green. And then this little city starts popping up. I mean, it is so exquisitely remote. Like, it's one of those cities that you feel shouldn't exist because it's in such a remote part of the world. And it does exist. Like, everything from the arrival to what I saw, the people I met was just, it was just life affirming. I mean, it was a very beautiful trip.
I think every tourism destination marketing organization in the world should hire you for uh, I think you could describe any place and just find such beautiful flowing language. It's incredible. One I know you've talked about recently. A friend was asking me about getting into safaris and costs and that, and I gave some suggestions about how East Africa, on the whole, I would say you have much more expertise than I, but on the whole, you're looking at parks, the famous ones that often have higher fees, higher costs, Southern Africa, Namibia, Botswana, maybe less so Botswana, but South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi has some incredible parks, some very little visited and generally lower fees and costs for that. Mana Pools is one I'm interested in. I've not been. I think, is that still your favorite safari?
It still is my absolute favorite national park for safari anywhere in the world. I mean, it is absolutely stunning. I mean, it's really, really remote. If you're going by road, I think it's a 2-day drive from Vic Falls and maybe a day or a day and a half from Harare. You can probably do it in a day. My parents and I flew from Vic Falls, and we flew out to Harare. And once you get there, I mean, no offense, I love the Masai Mara. I think the scenery, the landscapes, the light in the Mara or in the Serengeti is totally something out of this world. But at the same time, if you go during peak season, for each line, there's 20 cars. And
Mhm.
it's nice. I mean, you're guaranteed your sightings, but man, I do sometimes wish for a little more solitude. And Mana Pools like checks all those boxes. So it's called I forget what mana means. I mean, if anyone knows Shona in this group, please correct me. But I think mana means the number 4 in Shona. So
Hmm.
it's basically four sort of curves of the river Zambezi, and they form these pools where animals congregate, especially during the dry season. So it's 4 of these pools, hence mana pools. But the whole park is also framed by the Zambezi escarpment. So on the other side is Zambia. The park is in Zimbabwe. There's another park on the Zambian side, and it's framed by this escarpment where the mountains are about, forget, definitely a few hundred meters, could be 1,000 meters tall. So on one hand, you have these mountains. On the Zimbabwean side, you have these Mopani forests, which itself, I mean, I love Mopani trees. I mean, I describe Mopani forests as like being in a cathedral because they're just so big and they have this like really umbrella-like structure. And of course, when you go in the dry season, there is no water. It is extremely hot, extremely dry. And I think after some time, it's like, gosh, is this a zoo? Because there were just so many elephants. Like I can't even describe it. Like you're sitting in camp, you're just having a drink or something, and there's like 20 elephants who just walk by you.
Oh.
Or you just take a short drive out of the camp. There's lions snoozing underneath the tree.
Huh.
More zebras and and the various other antelopes than I could even count. Like it was just absolutely ridiculously beautiful. And again, because it is so remote, we didn't. I don't think we saw any other vehicles. I mean, we were staying in a pretty high end camp, and they do pride themselves on ensuring that you don't like meet other tourists. But even then, I mean, I don't think there were a whole lot of people because it's a remote. So yeah, Mana Pools it comes very highly recommended. And one of the things that I wanted to do this year, once the rains stop, we're just at the tail end of the rainy season here, is to explore some of the the larger national parks in Zambia. I mean, I keep going to Zambia for work, but surprisingly, I've never been able to go to one of the vast national parks. And so
Hmm.
I was thinking, but we'll see if what happens with travel in the region post or during this whole COVID-19 pandemic.
And talking about work, you're very much like when I used to be a corporate road warrior. This overnight flight, go straight from the airport to work in the morning, comb my hair, get a caffeine jolt, and try to make it through the day. So talk about how you make that work.
Mm-hmm. So I work in public health. So I work for a really large American NGO, which, as I was explaining in our little chit chat before we went live, is headquartered in Seattle. So when I first moved to Africa in 2012, I think I was a little more crazy with my sort of work travel balance. So I would routinely fly into Nairobi on the red eye flight from Addis, for example, which I think at that time would get in just before midnight because the airport would close at midnight. And I would sleep outside the domestic terminal for as many, like 3-4 hours. And I'd be on the 6 a.m. flight to Kisumu, shower, be at my desk at 8:30. I'm a little older now, and I don't think I can quite do that now. So what I do these days is, if I fly into Joburg, because Joburg is much further south, so most of the international flights tend to get in around 9 o'clock in the morning. So what I'll do is, if there's nothing which requires my physical presence in the office, I'll shower, I'll work for a few hours at home and go in the afternoon. But I mean, if there's a big meeting or something, I will change in the airport bathroom and I'll just walk straight into a meeting. But I've done quite a bit of that. The other thing which I tend to do as well is combine my work trips with personal trips. So, for example, car was surprisingly tagged onto a Nairobi trip
Hmm.
because it was actually not that much expensive adding a Kenya Airways flight out to Bangi and back on top of my Kenya Airways flight from Joburg to Nairobi. And so, I've done multiple countries. When I was living in Nairobi, I'd use Joburg as kind of my base in this region to add personal trips on my work trips. And now I kind of do it the other way around because I live in Joburg and I don't live in Nairobi any longer. So every time I go to Nairobi, which I do about every 2-3 months, I try and add trips on the side. Also, if I'm going to a country for work where I've not been before, I will add additional days on the side. to see more of the country. So I was in Gabon last year for a conference, and the actual conference was, I think, only like 3.5 days, but I had 3 days before and 3 days after, and I got to see quite a bit of the country, not just Libreville. So yeah, I mean, I try and mix it as much as I can with my work, and my work is super flexible, and I'm very grateful to have such a understanding and flexible team, which allows me to do that. But I will say that I'm 37 now. I struggle to have a full night's sleep on a transcontinental flight. I could sleep like a baby when I was younger. These days, I am a little groggy the next day.
And as I understand, you're very upfront. You're certainly not sneaking around, and you're saying I will pay the cost difference, and I will take my vacation time where appropriate.
Absolutely.
And I think it's something. I mean, not every employer is going to agree, but I think that's the way to do it. Is you be very clear, you be very honest, and you pay the incremental costs. And I've had multiple employers that wouldn't expect to necessarily agree, but they're like, okay, you're getting the work done, you're covering the cost, and you're doing what you want to do. So I think it usually, you can't say it never hurts to ask, but it usually isn't going to hurt to ask. And I think a lot of employers want motivated people that are interested about the world and ways to make things happen. So I hear you're like David says you're like a walking trip advisor, and Anya says you planned her entire Cabo Verde trip without ever having been there. So what's your planning methodology?
So well, before, again, I mean, it's just like COVID's just been such a spanner in the works, because right now there are no flight schedules, everything's just hypothetical. But what I do is, like, I have trip ideas constantly in my head, and I'm constantly like, I maintain this running list of trips. So if someone told me, oh hey, like, all right, if works, I suddenly realized that I have maybe a week off at work where work is not so crazy. It's that time of year to visit a certain country, let's say Mongolia. I think I have a 6-day itinerary for Mongolia written in this list. I have, 5-6 day list for Cabo Verde, and I have like a list of places that I'd want to visit in Iran, for example. So I have all these hypothetical trips that are listed down, hypothetical itineraries. So, I did this trip, as I was mentioning again before we went live, in the Caribbean, starting in Guyana, ending in St. Kitts. But I had all the flights mapped out, because not all the flights go on every day of the week. The difference in price between a flight on Tuesday versus one on Thursday could be $100. So I had kind of all of this arranged out. And so it was just literally a question of sort of like taking this outline and kind of fitting it in within that window of opportunity that I have. So I have hypothetical trips listed out pretty much for, a friend and I were actually talking about this, for my remaining 47 countries. I think I have hypothetical trips sketched out for probably about 25 or more of them already.
Wow. And this is Notepad, this is spreadsheets, this is Evernote. What are the actual?
It's just a Word document.
A Word document.
So it's just a Word document, and it has hyperlinks to all the various web pages that I refer to.
Fantastic. And yeah, I feel like tools that are too structured or too guided are less useful to me than something. Use Word. I often use a blank spreadsheet of just staring at it and piecing things together, and then repiecing them together until they start to fit, and there's a common thread that comes through. So I think while we're on shutdown, we can tap your brain maybe once a week for a mapped out trip that you haven't taken, can't take yet, and we can all travel through you that way. I think it'll be better than the virtual museum tours. You mentioned Guyana, and I think this is where you've lost over your years away from India. You've lost your ability to handle spice, because Apuri brought you to absolute tears. And talk about that.
Well, no, it wasn't the spice actually, but again, like this, yeah. But again, it's like, for those who follow me on Instagram, probably read the story. So, it's like, I mean, I think I'm one of those, as they say in Hong Kong, what is it, TCK, a third country kid. So I'm, it's like I struggle with my identity, because I speak with like an American. I think like an American in so many ways. India frustrates me, even though I spend well, not half my life any longer, but a significant chunk of my life, and especially, my most formative years growing up as a child. And I speak
Mhm.
Hindi and Bengali completely fluently without an accent. I mean, in the vernacular with all the dirtiest slangs possible.
Mhm.
So I'm very Indian on one hand, and the funny thing is, as a few people even know in this group, that once I start speaking Hindi, my head starts even nodding, and I have to like kind of like hit like stop, don't shake your head. So it's like I have this constant tension between my two halves, and also the fact that over the last 8 years I've been not been living in either of those two countries. I mean, I've been living first in Kenya, now in South Africa, with a bit of Mozambique in between, and I feel just so familiar pretty much anywhere on the continent. It's like I just feel, I kind of exhale, and I feel like, this is home. This is where I belong. So this sort of weird third country kid sort of identity crisis, and then a couple of months back in Guyana, and I was just waiting for my flight to Cache Falls, and in the little cafeteria at the airport, they were serving breakfast, and the breakfast was puri, which is a lentil stuffed flatbread, similar but slightly different to what would be called a puri in India. But it's the same principle. It's fried flatbread with something stuffed inside, and it was served with this really delicious chicken curry and some pickles. And as soon as I started eating it, it's like I just tears coming out of my eyes. And this old Guyanese Indian lady, really sweet lady, she's like, "Are you okay? Is it very spicy?" And I was like, "No, it's like I can't explain it, but it has nothing to do with the spice." It was just like, this sensation that I was having Indian food 10,000 miles away from India, prepared by the grandchildren or the great grandchildren of these immigrants who were brought literally as indentured laborers to work in the sugarcane plantations in the 19th century, and how they had retained certain aspects of their culture, even though they were not really connected any longer to India. None of them spoke an Indian language. They didn't really dress in Indian clothes unless it was for a function or, for something special. But they still retained that very important aspect of their native culture. And then here is me, who was constantly trying to deny that, and it
Mhm.
was just like a slap in my face. It's like, it was just such an emotional moment. I don't think I've ever felt so emotional having just, this really this really humble meal. And so yeah, it was just incredible. And I mean, during my entire time in Guyana and Trinidad, every time I had an Indian dish, an Indian inspired dish, it was more than just a meal, because I was constantly just, thinking about where this dish came from, and just kind of wondering about the process by which these descendants of immigrants had processed and reprocessed what had been handed down to them by their ancestors, and how they were still continuing that tradition, several hundred, well, several, not hundreds, over 100 years after arriving in this new land.
So let's talk about Indian diaspora, the food experience. As you said, you loved the dish, but it was different than you would have expected to see it in India. These have been interpreted as you say. So if you were going on a food centric tour of Indian diaspora around the world, what are some of the ones you would call out?
Whew. Okay. Well, of course, I mean, I would say there's two threads or two strands here.
Mhm.
I do think that there are certain Indian communities which still are very Indian, in the sense that they do retain their connections with the mother country, if I can
Mhm.
use that term. So, for example, the Indians in East Africa and Uganda and in Kenya and Tanzania do still retain a lot of their Indian culture. So they will wear Indian clothes in normal social settings. A lot of them will speak in Gujarati or in Punjabi, which are two of the larger communities. And a lot of their food hasn't really sort of been transformed. It still tastes very similar to the food you'd get in India. So when I was living in East Africa, I would say that Indian food in East Africa is just some of the most unbelievably tasty Indian food. Like I think the best tandoori chicken would be at Hashmi's in Nairobi. Like I've never in India had tandoori chicken, even
Mhm.
in the greasiest, most down to earth roadside dhaba in Punjab, you will not get tandoori chicken as good as you'd get in Hashmi's in Nairobi. I mean, it's psychedelic. But they've also, I mean, there have been a few adaptations to the Indian food there, but I think it stays more close to its roots. Indian food here in South Africa is quite different, because it's when the diaspora here is more African than Indian. So after apartheid ended, a lot of young Indian South Africans had a bit of an identity crisis. They were like, for the last 50, 60 years, we were treated as like, just a second-rate, third-rate citizens? Is this really our country? Should we be looking back towards India? So I know quite a few people here, Indian South Africans, who actually traveled to India, and they came back saying, you know what, after a few months in India, we realized we're Africans. I mean, no matter what happened to us, it was horrible. We still feel that we're African. We're not really Indian. So the Indian food here in South Africa is quite different. I mean, there is a lot of Indian food that's been brought by the wave of recent immigrants who've just come from India or from Pakistan or from Sri Lanka. But Indian South Africans who've been here for 100, 150 years, their food has evolved significantly. And it's quite different. The spices and the overall flavor profile is quite different from what you expect in India. Mauritius, again, has a huge Indian community. I mean, it's not, I think, 50%, but maybe 40% is Indian. And it's also evolved significantly, but you can still taste some of the original dishes that were that were modified in Mauritius. A lot of Mauritians came from Bihar, and so the cuisine does resemble a lot of the cooking that you still find in Bihar. We talked about Guyana. There's also Trinidad with incredible Indian food. And then, kind of like, I'm just kind of going on this culinary, just hopscotch tour around the world. So if you go to East Asia, Southeast Asia, you have Malaysia, which again is probably one of my favorite countries for the food. I mean, it's just like, I mean, it's like I think I eat nonstop every time in Malaysia. But yeah, you have a lot of Indian food, which is kind of like in some very interesting ways started combining with other cuisines to create this really beautiful sort of this hybrid cuisine. So one of my favorite examples is like when they make mee goreng, which is the noodle stir-fried noodles in Malaysia. Unlike in Indonesia, which is quite sweet because it's mostly ketchup, mayonnaise, and soy sauce and whatnot. In Malaysia, they'll add some curry powder to it, and that's the Indian influence that comes in. So like mee goreng is so different in Malaysia. It's like you kind of get this like hint, this whiff of India hitting you every time you take a spoonful or a forkful of mee goreng. So yeah, these are just, I mean, I mean, the Indian diaspora is all around the world, and it's just, I mean, it is just mind blowing. And in a sense, I mean, I'll say, I mean, it's been very humbling to see how the community has been able to establish itself, flourish, adapt, as well as retain some of the original aspects of their culture.
So we've got so many comments. I'll run through them and pick the ones to respond about Dutch warrings, Indian food via Suriname, via Holland. Have you had bunny chow in South Africa? Pinning you down for better Indian food outside India. And let's see, is it Fiji? Maybe not spicy enough. And laksa from KK. So.
So I've not been to Fiji. Surprisingly, I've not been to any country in the South Pacific. So I think I mentioned I've like 27 countries for which I have virtual itineraries mapped out. Most of the countries for which I do not have an itinerary mapped out is the South Pacific, because I think unless flights resume, it's a moot point making an itinerary because it's so much dependent on flight schedules. Laksa, delicious. Again, one of those dishes where I think laksa is a great example of a dish which kind of brings all these disparate but beautiful threads of different cultures in Malaysia into this one harmonious whole. So you get that influence from Southeast Asia in the coconut-based broth, but at the same time, you have the curry. It's. I mean, once someone asked me to describe laksa to them, and I said, imagine a Thai curry but much lighter. But instead of just a red curry, imagine red curry but which has been boosted with curry powder with some of the more Indian spices. So yeah, laksa is a great example of one of those dishes which sort of just really nicely combines these different threads. There's this point of, I've not been to Suriname, unfortunately, but yeah, I am aware of Suriname also having that that thread of Indian cuisine kind of migrating its way through the Netherlands and also through Indonesia, which was the other Dutch colony on the other side of the world. And yes, I've had bunny chow. It's I think bunny chow is one of those dishes that has had a resurgence in recent years because 50 years ago or during apartheid, it was just one of those dishes. The history of bunny chow is a fascinating one, and no one really knows what the correct history is. Some people say it comes from bania chow. So bania is an Indian caste, and the banias are the traders, and so it's like it was meant to be vegetarian, and it was just curry and a hunk of bread. So it was and chow is slang for food, so it was like food that was eaten by the banias. And the other sort of urban legend that I've heard is that during apartheid, Indian workers were not supposed to eat meat when they were when they were working jobs in whites only parts of town, and so they could only eat vegetables or bread, and so they would smuggle the meat inside the bread, and so when they would show their bread to the supervisor, like, oh, it's just a hunk of bread, just it's fine, and they would smuggle meat inside the bread. So no one really knows what why the bani chow resulted. But I think in recent years, it's just become such an iconic dish in South Africa. Like every time I've had friends visit me in South Africa, they're like, "Oh, where can we get a bani chow?" And yep, we'll often get a bani chow because it is such a representative dish of the country.
You haven't mentioned United States or Canada. The disclaimer: I enjoy. I've been to India a number of times. I enjoy pretty much everything I eat, but I'm no expert at all. But say if my wife and I are traveling around the U.S., just because we want something like vegetables or that, if the options are McDonald's, Subway, a Chinese buffet, or an Indian buffet in a small town, we'll choose one, either the Chinese or the Indian. And generally, her rule is either if it's vegetarian only, it's probably going to be better than average, or if it's a meat one, if goat, at least one of the dishes is goat, or it features prominently on the menu. Is that a reasonable approach, or should we take a different sorting mechanism to
No,
pick
I
out?
mean, so Indian food so first of all, Indian food, as you know, is extremely diverse. I mean,
Mhm,
India's food is like every state has its own cuisine, and even within
mhm,
states, the cuisine varies insanely. Just like
mhm,
even when you just travel a few hundred miles, it's a totally different flavor profile. So, for example, West Bengal and Bihar or Jharkhand, three and Orissa, like four states which kind of form like the eastern part of the country.
mhm,
The food changes so dramatically across all these different states. And what's ended up happening, I think, because it is more accessible and because it's more palatable, the food that's made its way in the West is kind of a hybrid of Punjabi food. So it's rich, it's got cream and sort of like these
mhm.
warm spices. So the chicken butter masalas and the shahi paneers and the dal fry and all of that. So the food that you get in your average Indian buffet is sort of, I would say, a watered down version of what you would get in Punjab. It's definitely spicier, more richer in Punjab. But the food that we eat at home is actually very simple. So just before this, I just made a very simple paneer dish with barely any oil in it. Forget about putting cream, and I just use fat-free milk and cashew paste to make a really decadent, rich gravy. In a restaurant, they're just like take like 1 liter of cream and make it into a calorie bomb.
Yeah.
So the food that we eat at home is extremely different, and the food that we eat at home in other parts of the country bears very little resemblance to what you would get in your average Indian restaurant in the West. Like the food in West Bengal, for example, around Calcutta and other cities in the East. I don't think I've had proper Bengali food anywhere in the U.S., and that includes New York City. There are a few Bangladeshi restaurants, but Bangladeshi food is quite different from food in West Bengal. Like theirs is oilier, a little spicier. They use onion and garlic in their vegetarian dishes, which we don't.
Mhm.
And so, it's a cuisine that's totally unheard of in America. But in a pinch, when I used to live in small town New York, in Ithaca, New York, where I went for grad school and then up in Syracuse, we would, yeah, my friends and I would regularly do lunchtime buffets, and it was always a treat. I mean, I will never, I'll never stick my nose up at a good Indian buffet, never.
Yeah, I think the first time we took my mother-in-law from Shanghai to when we were living in New York, it was just an Indian buffet for lunch, and she was just eating the paneer over and over and over, and and she finally said, "Oh, these tofu are really good." And I said, "Oh." And their cheese, and she went, "Oh, how many did I eat?"
Hopefully, she's not lactose intolerant.
Yeah, she can do okay. Yeah, I mean, there's actually, especially it's different regions, and I forget the years where there was some sort of existential crisis at one point. I don't know, 2 decades ago or so, where there was reports of the average Japanese was now taller than the average Chinese. Which, I mean, China has huge. If you go in the north, there's lots of very very tall people. Towards the south, you get more less heights, but there is this big existential crisis. They're getting taller than us. So certainly when I started going to Shanghai in the 1990s already, most apartments you would see the daily milk delivery box with yogurt or milk that even if people weren't totally enjoying it, they were drinking it for either perceived or real health reasons. So I've skipped over a bunch. So it turns out that you have a skill to better than Google Photos to recognize any photo essentially of a place in the world, even many places you've not been, and identify where it is. So what is that skill? How do you do it? Is James Dwyer's asking.
I just Googled it now. Of course not. So it's just, again, it's one of those things I can't quite describe. So when I perceive the world visually. So if you give me directions, like, walk 100 meters, take a right turn, take a left turn, do this, do that, I would struggle. I mean, I'd probably come last in a treasure hunt because I couldn't follow directions. But I take visual cues from the environment, and so if there's a picture and if there's one visual cue that strikes me, I can almost sort of like immediately recognize where that was taken, where that photo was taken. But if I don't, I don't. Like, I'm just completely lost. So I think it's both a skill, but also a drawback, because I think, especially when I was, in school, I would just get sucked into this whirlpool. It's like, oh my God, I know this. I know this. I'm sure I know this. And you kind of just like, get this tunnel vision, and you just like you just keep circling within that little tunnel, and you can't quite, bring yourself outside of that. So, I mean, if I've been to that particular place, chances are I will recognize it. If I haven't been there, and I will pick up a cue, it could be something as simple as just like, a sign in a particular language, or I don't even know, just a mountain that's visible in the background. It's just, I mean, it's hard to define, but as soon as I pick up the cue, it's like my brain just sort of like, circuits kind of just fall in place.
Fantastic. And another one, the classic top three countries. Maybe we'll make you. They each one has to be on a different continent from the others. I know you can speak so lovingly about every place. So three, one,
Sure.
one
Yeah.
for each.
I think I can do that. So let's start with the continent where I'm on right now, in Africa. So I think my favorite country, bar none, in Africa has to be Ethiopia. I remember this is when I was still living in America in 2010. A friend of a friend was going to Ethiopia, and I was kind of like, huh? Because I started sort of traveling to offbeat destinations quite late. And at that time, Ethiopia was associated with not the most pleasant things, which of course, I mean, as we know, is just probably like as wrong of an impression of a country as possible. So I started going to Ethiopia in 2012, or I think it was 2012 when my first trip. My friends and I went to the Danakil Depression. We were one of the first tourists that went there after that the attack on tourists. And the Danakil was not as busy or as popular as it is these days. Did a few of the clifftop churches in Tigray. And just because I was living in Kenya, and it was a really cheap air ticket from Nairobi to Addis Ababa, I was going to Ethiopia for personal reasons about once every quarter. I had good friends who were living there at that time, and I just fell in love with the country, like everything about it. The fact that it has 2,000 plus years of written, recorded history. Their pride about this history. I mean, it's exquisite. The fact that in Ethiopia, you can speak authoritatively about kings and kingdoms that existed before Christ. The fact that they had trade with the Arabian Peninsula, with Jerusalem, with India, and so on and so forth. The religion. I mean, I'm fascinated by the evolution of Christianity, and I just love the fact that in Ethiopia, it's like Christianity sort of I wouldn't say it stopped evolving, but it's sort of like the sort of Christianity you'd expect to see if you took a time machine and went 1700 years in the past, before you had the break, and where you had the break with the Copts. So it's just everything about it: the food, the culture, the language, the people, the traditions, of course the scenery. Probably one of the most diverse countries on earth. I mean, I just can't stop talking about Ethiopia. It also helps that people of Indian origin are respected in a different way in Ethiopia, because in the 1960s, 70s, and even until more recently, a lot of the university teachers and doctors are Indians. And so if you talk to an educated, a well-educated Ethiopian who's been to university or medical school, chances are that their teacher will, at least one of their teachers will have been Indian. And so, we get a sort of a little bit extra respect.
Mm,
And just because I heard a lot of people say like Ethiopians are, not very easy to sort of crack because it's a very unique culture,
mm,
and oftentimes, it's difficult to sort of get into their culture. And I've never had that issue in Ethiopia, and I think that being of Indian origin really helped that. All right, let's jump to another continent, Argentina. If I had to choose a country or a city where I could live the rest of my life, it would have to be Buenos Aires. The first time I went to Buenos Aires, it was like being in Europe on steroids. Like you take the taxi to the airport, you go down the freeway, and you just kind of like pop out in front of Teatro Cologne, and you're like, holy moly, this is like Madrid, Paris, Vienna, and everything bundled
mm,
into this decadent bonbon and just thrown into your face. And it was just insanity. Like the nightlife, the just the fact that even though Argentina has been in a perennial economic crisis, just how happy people were and how welcoming and how friendly. It was just insane. And the architecture, the food, obviously, but not just the big city, but the landscapes. I mean, I think I might have mentioned this on Rick's podcast, but when people ask me what my favorite region of the planet is, I will say it's southern Patagonia. I
mm,
loved Antarctica, but if I had to choose between Antarctica and southern Patagonia, I would still say southern Patagonia.
mm,
Antarctica is beautiful, but it's so inaccessible and feels so special. It's almost like, it's like that Chinese vase in your apartment, in your grandma's cabinet that you can admire from a distance, but you can't touch because you're afraid if you touch it, it's just going to break. Whereas Patagonia is just like it's in your face. It's like
mm,
you feel so little in the face of nature. I mean, and I'm a big, tall guy, and it's one of the few places on Earth where the wind literally picked me up and tossed me across, a trail because it's just so windy and just so, it's just like so elemental the weather there. But at the same time, you just feel so aware of the joy of being a human being because everything in Patagonia is just on this amazing epic scale. And I think all across Argentina, it's just like the food, the culture. It's just one of those magical countries, and of course, extremely diverse. Like up in the north, you have these hot deserts and mountainous landscapes in the Andes. You have wine country in Mendoza. You have like shimmering blue lakes and snow-capped mountains in Bariloche. You keep going further south, you have the world's biggest glaciers outside of the polar regions, and then when you come down to Tierra del Fuego, it's like these austere, windswept landscapes with penguins walking around. And then you have, Buenos Aires and all the big cities. So it's just like one of those countries that's just such an assault in a good way on your senses. All right. Another country, I'm just trying to think of a continent. I'm trying to think, should I choose between Asia and Europe?
okay, well, we'll let you do both. The
Well,
elevator
I
pitch.
mean, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, of course, my favorite country, I would say, in Europe would be, I mean, Italy, I guess. I mean, again, it's just so diverse and just so full of history and culture and amazing food, and probably like some of the friendliest people I've ever met. But I think everyone would say something like Italy or Spain because they are crowd pleasers. But a country in Europe where I think I went with, I would say pretty much zero expectations and just had my mind blown was Romania.
Hmm,
It's one of those countries where, it's just, again, extremely diverse. You have everything from snow-capped mountains to these ancient monasteries, and not just monasteries, but, there are these churches which served as fortresses in Transylvania, the fortified churches. Of course, these really beautiful, like cities, I call them chocolate box cities because they look like they were painted. They came up from a box of
hmm,
chocolates because they're just so exquisitely beautiful. Sibiu, and Brasov, and I forget what the other big one city is in Shigashora. So Shigashora, Sibiu, and Brasov, the three big cities in Transylvania. But yeah, it's just again one of those countries where I expected nothing and just had my mind blown because it was just so exquisitely beautiful. Yeah, so I guess three sort of just very random countries that I just pulled out of my head.
fantastic. And your descriptions could be my bedtime stories, except they wouldn't put me to sleep. They're so exciting. There was a quick follow-up. Have you been to the Falkland Islands yet?
No, I've not been to the Falkland Islands.
And I've heard from people there that it's something that I had assumed was a quick stopover, and from people that have been there, it's very much not. It's something with incredible scenery, as I understand. I've not been to Patagonia, so I've been virtually traveling with everything you mapped out, and hoping that trip will come in the next year or two. And you did mention in about Ethiopia, about a country where being an Indian had a specific connection, or say you were born in Minnesota, where I'm from, and going to either Sweden or Somalia, there's a certain special connection. You've also got the diaspora, and then you've also got places where it's really hard for you to get a visa. So take from that grab bag jumble, which resonates the most, which you feel like expanding on.
Sorry, I didn't quite get your question. Expanding
I mean,
on.
you're traveling on an Indian passport. You said you're a third
No,
country
I
child.
travel on a U.S. passport.
I'm sorry?
I travel on a U.S. passport.
Oh no, you have a U.S. passport. Oh, that was your parents then. I remember you were talking about like Botswana.
That
Essentially,
was
it
my
was,
parents.
yeah, that was your
Yeah,
parents.
so
So,
it's like, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, one of the things that is probably going to happen in the post or in the intra-COVID world is that a lot of powerful passports will be or might be treated the same way as not so powerful passports. So yeah, I'm traveling with my parents has always presented some unique challenges for precisely the reasons you mentioned. I mean, Indians, like for the very reason that there's such a thriving community also for many countries makes these countries be very wary of their intentions as to whether or not they're really tourists or they're trying to set up business and stuff. So almost every country requires a visa of Indian passport holders. So yeah, we had some pretty bad visa issues when traveling with my parents. So their Botswana visa was denied multiple times because I mean, it was just routine stuff like their bank statements were not an A4 size. And it's just like, I mean, I remember I got so angry at the end. I mean, I screamed at the woman at the Botswana embassy in Delhi. And I said that, if they didn't give my parents a visa, I'd come and burn their consulate down to the ground. They obviously didn't get their visas.
hmm. And that diaspora, I'm fascinated by. So my connection is more with China. I lived in China for 8 years, and I show up in places, say like a Central African Republic, and I instantly think, oh, maybe it feels like it's hard for me there, but there's either or both a Chinese or an Indian diaspora in almost every country in the world now, and they're there doing commerce, and I'd say some are probably in rivalry, and I don't have a lot of personal insight. I mean, I read a lot about, say, Chinese communities in Africa. But just interested on your view of that diaspora life. I remember one interview you mentioned you lived in Mozambique, and one interview I read was a Chinese shop worker in Mozambique who the Chinese reporter was interviewing him, and he truly had no idea where in the map in the world he was living for the past couple of years. And because he had just gone there to work, and from say a rural background, and he was just there to work and make money, and send money home and then go back. And then others, of course, set up multi-generational communities and get more integrated in the community. So I'm curious, that window. I don't have that kind of level of insight as much, certainly into the Indian diasporas that you're seeing and encountering.
Right. So again, it depends on the country. So for example, I think the Indian community in South Africa obviously is very integrated. I mean, as I mentioned, they will say they're not Indian, they're African. They are 100% African, and it's only recently in the last few years that people have sort of developed this interest in India, sort of like in hindsight. It's like, oh, it might be a nice idea for us to try and learn an Indian language or just dress up a little more in our Indian costumes. But I'm yet to meet an Indian South African who would say like, I'm Indian first and South African second. So it's a very well integrated community. Mozambique, I think it also goes back to the type of colonialism they had. So the Portuguese, of course, I mean, it was just a different type of horrible colonialism. But the one thing that the Portuguese didn't do in their colonized countries was they didn't racially like separate the races. So it wasn't unusual for the races to mix and occasionally marry, which is why all the former Portuguese colonies have such big mixed race communities, which you don't see in Kenya, for example, where which was a British colony. So I think as a result of that, the Indian community is more well integrated. Like in my office in Mozambique, there are several people who who were. I mean, with mixed race people, it's so hard to kind of guess origins. But they'll say like, don't you see my eyes? Like these are Indian eyes. Or someone say, well, haven't you seen my nose? Like this is an Indian nose. And then they'll say like, oh yeah, my grandpa, like one of them was from Goa, which is where a lot of immigrants from India, because it was a Portuguese colony, came to various other Portuguese colonies or to mainland Portugal. So it's a much more integrated community there. I'm talking of those who've been there for several generations, not the ones who are coming right now for business, who are obviously not so well integrated. And you ask them what languages they speak. I mean, they'll all speak fluent Portuguese, and they might speak Gujarati. But I just once asked them, "Do you speak Hindi?" I'm like, "Nope, nope. We sometimes watch Bollywood films, but we understand enough because Gujarati and Hindi. I mean, they're different languages, but you can kind of pick up the themes of what's being talked." And not a lot of them speak English unless they've traveled abroad or they work with people who speak English. As you go up the coast, Tanzania kind of goes both ways. I mean, I think there's a lot of integration. Again, because I think the Indian people have been there for so long. You go to places like Zanzibar, anywhere along the Pwani, the coastal region, I get mistaken for a local there because pretty much everyone kind of looks like me because it's just so beautifully mixed. But I think as you kind of start going away from the coast, like in interior Kenya, and this has been one of my huge gripes and one of the reasons why I have a lot of Indian Kenyan friends, but it's because they're friends I like, they're people I like, but not just because they're Indian people, because I just think they're way too insular and not at all integrated. Like they live in very sort of, like Indian heavy neighborhoods where it's like everyone living there is Indian. They go to that Indian temple or mosque, which is in that neighborhood. The restaurants in that neighborhood cater to them. So if you go to a place like Westlands in Nairobi or Milimani in Kisumu, it's very Indian heavy. And it's like, I get the feeling that they're kind of like holding onto their culture in a way that resists any sort of assimilation with the local culture. In other countries, I mean, gosh, I mean, there are Indians everywhere. I mean, it's crazy just where, I've seen the Indian diaspora. And I think it depends a lot on when the community arrived in that particular country. Like, for example, in West Africa, I don't think Indians have been there for a really long period of time. It's, for example, the Lebanese who fill that niche in which Indians are present in East Africa. Like the Lebanese are very influential in running commerce and shops and supply chains and stuff like that. And so the Indian communities with whom I've interacted in West Africa are more recent. But again, I mean, they all speak French very fluently. Yeah, I don't think I've ever met anyone who would be just, what you mentioned, where they wouldn't even know where they are on the map, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like I have seen instances of people who've just been sort of like flown in from India to work in a small town in Malawi or in Kenya or in Zambia. And this is their first time out of the country, and they probably don't really know where exactly they are. I mean, they kind of know vaguely, in Southern Africa or Eastern Africa, but if someone asked them, oh, where is Zamba in Malawi on the map, they would struggle to even, or Kisumu, they probably wouldn't be able to say that.
I think there would be a fascinating lifetime for a sociologist to just interview people in either Addis or Dubai airport and just where they're coming and going on these new trade and immigration routes. So I think everybody wants to hear you speak lovingly about their favorite countries. So there's a question: have you been to the Balts? And then also another question from Tohid of favorite Muslim country. I guess define that phrase as you will.
Have I been to where? The first
The
question to
Baltic
the
states. So Estonia,
the Baltic.
Latvia,
Yeah.
Lithuania.
Yeah, I have been to I've been to every single country in Europe, but it was again one of those. I think it was at a phase in my life when I was still I mean, I wouldn't say I was a faster traveler, but I was like when I go, like one of the things that I try and do every country I go is that no matter how small the country, how difficult it is, I will go somewhere outside of the capital because capitals are not always representative of the country. Unfortunately, I think I spend most of my time in the three capital cities of the three Baltic states. I did, I was racing because I had to meet up with my father who was in Slovenia at that time, and we were road tripping after that. So I think it was not a very long trip. So I took the ferry from Tallinn, from Helsinki to Tallinn, and just like took the bus from Tallinn to Riga to Vilnius, and then took the bus from Vilnius to Warsaw, and just kind of made my way down Poland to meet my father. So yes, I've been, but one of the things that I wanted to do this year was to return to Europe, negotiate with my office to work remotely and use time that I, during the day to actually do a deeper dive in many of these countries, rent a car, which is my favorite way of seeing countries, and just, head away from the larger cities and just kind of like, go to where sort of where my imagination takes me. Unfortunately, again, that's not going to happen. So yes, I've been to the Baltics,
Well,
and
actually, driving reminded me. I overlooked Adam Hickman's comment. Sao Tome driving. What's the quick story there?
Unfortunately, there's a, oh God, Adam. So, I think it's like, I mean, I think Anya is also on the chat. So it's like if Ryan, Adam, Anya, and Jujan are on the chat, they know all about my car story. So on one hand, I love driving. I've driven in, gosh, I mean, I would say, like over 70 countries or something. So I love driving. I think it's the best way to experience a country. But also, I mean, like you can get yourself in sticky situations. And for those of you who are connected with me on WhatsApp, my WhatsApp profile picture is me in my underwear trying to pull a car out of the mud in Kenya because I drove it into the mud while on safari. But in Sao Tome, so we had this really big SUV. And in Sao Tome, the roads get really narrow as you're in the southern part of the island. And there was this large bus stationed on one of these tiny little bridges. And I think I had, and the day before, I was actually driving a much smaller car. And so I didn't quite gauge the gap between the car and the bus. And I just heard this little click, sort of like it was like literally the sound of someone like snapping a finger. I was like, oh, maybe, just, I don't know, maybe I could have just like clipped the bus or something. It was like no big deal. And then voila, like a few minutes later, we see this bus just like bearing down on us. And I'm like, oh, maybe they're in a hurry. Should we pull over? And Adam's like, no, dude, he wants you to stop because I think he must have done something. And I realized that, I had swiped one of the mirrors, the side mirrors of the bus, like this really big mirror. Like it's not a tiny mirror. And I had swiped this mirror. It was just like dangling. And of course, these guys were like, all right, forget about it. Just give us 200 or 250 euros, whatever they said, and we'll forget this incident ever happened. And of course, me being the principal, I'm never going to pay a bribe person. Like, nope, our car is fully insured. This is there. We shouldn't be paying anything. We're going to get a police report. So first of all, I mean, Sao Tome barely sees any tourists, and there was this one poor police officer. Anya made a meme out of this whole thing. Like this poor police officer is just like very diligently writing down everything. I think it's like the first time he's had like foreign tourists in a car accident or something, completely clueless. And then he says, well, there's no police station in this part of the island. So we'll have to go to, near the capital where there is a police station where they can process your report and write an insurance report and stuff like that. And said, great, get in the car. And this was an SUV, and I forget how many there was. It was Ryan, Ryan's wife, Jujana, Adam, myself. So it was a full car. And we had a guide who was showing us. I was driving, he was guiding. So on top of that, we have this police officer who's literally like stuffed in the boot of the car. And I understand Portuguese quite well. And he kept saying, like, Senor, like you need to like keep going fast. And on that day, as we were going down towards the southern tip of the island, it was really foggy. And the classic site in Sao Tome is the Pico Cao Grande, which is this volcanic plug. This, you've seen photos. It's just stunning. And it was in clouds. So obviously we couldn't see it. And on the way back, the Pico was out of the clouds. So we were like, we have to stop. We stopped. And this guy was like, just be quick. We need to keep going. And we just took all our photos in a group and everything. And we had to stop again because there was another viewpoint. And all the while, there was this police officer who we had pretty much kidnapped and like stuffed in the boot to, like if this had happened in any other country, like you wouldn't be stopping to take photos every few minutes. But we were just like, we just totally like, took advantage of this poor fellow. So we get to this police station. There's no electricity. They have a computer on which they're supposed to type our insurance report. Obviously didn't work. And so he just was writing everything like in like the slowest possible way. And it was like the whole town's police force descended on us because they were like, oh my God, it's like, this is incredible. Like, it's like the highlight of, I don't know, like the last so many months that we've had something like this. And then finally said, okay, we need to impound your car. And we're like, you're kidding me. It's like, it's 7 o'clock, it's dark, we have a flight tonight. How do you get back to the capital? And it said, don't worry, we have a bus waiting for you. And that bus was the bus which I had clipped. And I spent the next uncomfortable 1.5 hours on that bus, believe it or not, sitting right next to that same police officer that we had kidnapped. I mean, I took my jacket and I just like hid my face under him. I was like, I do not want anyone to look at me. And people were actually friendly. Like we thought they would be like, giving us the stink eye, and they're like, trying to make small talk. And we're like, forget us, please. Like, don't forget. Forget we are existing here. Like we're no one. Don't make this more embarrassing than what it already is.
Jeez. Incredible story. So Tauhid's question, favorite Muslim country, and his phrase, what I guess there's a lot of ways you can define which are in that basket, but one that jumps out.
Well, one that jumps out would be probably one that, well, I can say two for that matter, just kind of like to balance the question out. So for two different reasons. So one is Syria. I mean, I think, you had Caitlin Jarvis a while back, and she raved about Syria. So Caitlin and I were on the same trip, and it was just one of those unbelievably memorable trips. And I think, it's just, it just takes on a whole different dimension when we're all in the same boat while we are stuck, we are frightened, we don't know what's happening with this world. Can you imagine that's what the Syrian people have been through for the last 8, 9 years? That has been their daily reality. And yet, when we went to Syria, yes, there was, still a lot of destruction. There was a lot of, reminders of the horrors that had taken place. But people were the friendliest and the kindest. Like, they were, you were walking down the souk in Damascus and people were handing you nuts, and because they were just thrilled to see tourists had returned to Syria. And the other thing about Syria, which struck me, which I'd heard from a lot of friends who had been to Syria before 2011, is the tolerance. The fact that this was a majority Muslim country, but then you cross the border from Lebanon, the first building you see is this massive duty-free booze shop. And Fadi and Guide, our guides, were like, yep, time to stock up because booze is really expensive in Syria. I mean, I was kind of like, this is not happening. It's like, I can't believe that, you're going to a majority Muslim country with, where it's perfectly fine to just, buy liquor and then consume that liquor later on and, party and have no one really sort of, question you. It's like, it's tolerance. It's kind of like how I remember Turkey over 10 years back, where you could have, someone who's fully covered and then another person, a lady who's dressed in like, a summer style European frock, and they could both be, just walking hand in hand without either judging the other person. And I think, that is still there in Syria. Obviously, a lot of that has, it's been really badly damaged during the war, that whole fabric of society. But it was just seeing that, and as I mentioned, that I'm a complete fan of early Christian history, and like Syria is kind of like, it's a lodestone of early Christian history, and it was just incredible to sort of see these ancient monasteries and churches and communities which still speak in Aramaic existing side by side with Muslim neighbors in a country without the sort of the fighting or the disagreements that you see in so many countries around the world. Another country which I think it's definitely is a country where Islam is in the complete absolute majority is Saudi Arabia. So we were the first group of tourists, official tourists, that made it to Saudi Arabia. Again, Caitlin and Anya and others were on that trip. Anya and you know, like Anya talked about my planning skills. Anya
Mhm.
is the master planner. Like she
Mhm.
has this insane habit of what I say, herding cats. Like I would lose my top if I had to deal with some of the stuff that she deals with when
Mhm.
putting these trips together. And so she put together this crazy EPS meetup. It was like 50 people, whatever, that went to the edge of the world in Saudi. That was just like one small part of the trip. So while most people stayed in Riyadh and did the edge of the world, James Martin, who I think is on the chat. So James, Mike Kufner, myself, Scott Shelley, we rented cars and visited some other parts of the country. So we went to the Al Waba crater, which again, it's this majestic, like absolutely insanely mind-boggling natural form in the desert, several hours, well, I think it was like 4 or 5 hours outside of Jeddah. In any other country, like you'd have expected, like tour buses just all around the crater. And of course, being Saudi Arabia, there was not a single other tourist, and the only person who was there was a caretaker who only spoke Urdu and some Arabic. So it's perfect for me to communicate with him, but he was kind of
Mhm.
like gobsmacked to see foreign tourists.
Yeah.
Jeddah, this this beautiful old city again, which is so cultured and so ancient and so diverse and so beautiful. We obviously didn't go to Mecca. I still believe that even though some people might say it's fine, I do think it's not. It's not something that's particularly respectful. So what we did was we went to the very last checkpost, which we were tracking on the map, after which non-Muslims couldn't go, and we could see the tower in the distance. We took the turn, we took the non-Muslims lane, and circle around the city. But it was a great. It we could feel the spiritual energy, if that's some way to describe it. And the other part of Saudi Arabia that we saw, which again, it's just again so diverse in this one country, is Abha, which is this town, and it's a city. It's a large city in the mountains right across the border from Yemen. And I've not been to Yemen. I was supposed to go to mainland Yemen later this year. Again, not going to happen most likely. But you start to see those mud brick skyscrapers like you see in Hadramaut in some valleys and in this part of Saudi Arabia. So yeah, I'm just we didn't have a whole lot of time. I know there are many people who spent weeks on their tourist visas going all around Saudi, and I would personally love to go when Madan Saleh is open officially, and also to visit the rock art in Hayil, I think, if I'm getting the pronunciation correct, but also visit a few of the other smaller towns and oases. But yeah, Saudi Arabia was just such a revelation. I mean, I think again, this was our ignorance and sort of the way in which these countries are projected. My mom was a little freaked out. This was just after Khashoggi, and she was like, "Oh my God, it's like you need to be very careful. Like, do not do this, do not do that." And I was on edge. I'm like, "Oh my God, it's like, is this going to be like North Korea, where I'm going to be judged for everything that I do?"
Mhm.
And I think the biggest surprise landing in Saudi Arabia was just how normal it was. It was just like, oh, I mean, I can rent a car, take an Uber, just go anywhere I want. And you need to obviously, this was before the latest round of reform, so we had to be a little careful. So, for example, like we couldn't walk into, if it was just a group of men, we couldn't walk into the family section of a restaurant. There were
Mhm.
certain sections of the malls which were restricted only to families. So, just a few restrictions. If there was prayer time, we had to understand that the restaurants would be closed, the gas stations would be closed. But other than that, I mean, people were just so friendly and so just so happy to see outsiders and having such a good time. So yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia was just one of those countries which just completely gobsmacked me. And I think most of us who did that trip and those who went subsequently afterwards just said that it was one of the more special countries that they visited. So yeah, I think just two examples, I would say.
And we'll close. David wants current events to intrude on us one more time. So South African Airways, various news reports about their situation. I think for some of the more remote destinations, as I understand, they fully divorced from Airlink a little while ago. That Airlink might have a separate or different future. So comments from the locals' perspective from your base in Johannesburg.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I will say that South African Airways in the past, I mean, it used to be an absolutely fantastic airline. I mean, I used to love South African Airways. I mean, and this was back in the day when it was probably, it was even until recently, they were one of the very few airlines that went to every single continent. And they had connections to, I remember taking them when I went to Argentina, I think, and they had connections at that time to even to Buenos Aires, in addition to Sao Paulo and Rio. And it was just this magnificent airline with, with these great planes with delicious South African wine on their menus, with plentiful food and really good cabin service. And of course, like, I mean, not to be offensive to other African airports, but man, when you transit through Joburg, you're like, wow, like what an airport. I mean, now that I've lived here for 3.5 years, it doesn't wow me, but when you come in from Lusaka or Kisumu, it's like Joburg Airport is just like, it's just
Mm.
mind blowing because it is
Yeah.
massive and beautiful. But the thing with South African Airways is, I mean, it's just, I mean, I don't mean to sound nasty against and state-owned enterprises. But the thing is, I mean, the airline hasn't been operated very efficiently. It's something which we have seen with like Air India, with Kenya Airways. I'm just picking up some random state-owned airlines. But a lot of these state-owned airlines are there for prestige rather than profit. I mean, it is prestigious to have your own national carrier with these
Hmm.
gleaming, like like these wide aisle aircrafts traveling to every single continent on Earth. And I think that prestige, this sense of South African exceptionalism, which I still hear a lot, of South Africa being different from the rest of Africa, I think really got in the way of being being a more effective and a more efficient airline, which I think Ethiopian really understood. So, for example, if you've been to Addis Airport during the daytime, it's ghost town. There are no planes. The airport's empty because all their planes are just flying around. They're small planes are doing their domestic hops or they're doing their short haul trips to Djibouti, to Hargeisa, to Nairobi, to Khartoum, to Asmara, to wherever. And once those planes come back at night, they're again doing medium haul flights within Africa, which the 737s can still do. Like their planes are constantly up in the air. And if you instead, just as a case in comparison, you look at South Africa or Johannesburg. It's first of all, it's located at the bottom of the continent.
Hmm.
These planes can't, there's no point taking an Airbus 340 to Lusaka.
Yeah.
So the 340s or the 330s are just like sitting on the tarmac the whole day. And they're, they do that one big trip to Perth and that trip to Hong Kong and that trip to Sao Paulo. And they sit there for the whole day and they return the next day. So it's just been an incredibly inefficient business model. Joburg's about 6,000 feet above sea level. None of these planes can take off with their full payload during the summer months. It never gets really hot, but it's warm enough that these planes can't take off with the full payload. So even though you have people who are willing to pay to travel, like to America, for example, the planes can't go with a full flight. So
Hmm.
all these things have just been constantly chipping away. It's not been just one factor, but it's like all these different factors. And I think, the government's been bailing out South African Airways. And I think when you have what's happening right now, where the country is losing like something like 13 billion rands, which is close to $1 billion of GDP every single day that we're having a lockdown, tossing, $1 billion to South African Airways, which is what it needs to kind of get back on its feet, is not going to be very politically popular in this country. So I think the government has basically lost its patience and it's reached a point where it's kind of like accepting the fact that having a prestige airline is maybe not the way to go. I still do think South African Airways or whoever buys bits and pieces of it will operate its regional flights because right now, I mean, they do have, well, before COVID, they were still maintaining full flights to like Lusaka, Harare, Maputo, Gaborone, Windhoek, like all the regional big cities and capitals. And I think there's a huge gap for those because there is really no, I don't see any point in relying totally on Ethiopian to fulfill that gap for these regional flights. So I do think South African Airways will continue to operate in some capacity. But when I think about some of the routes that they had even given up before COVID, and which I don't think will ever make an appearance, and most of them are already being serviced by other airlines. So the Sao Paulo route was being serviced by LATAM. The route to Hong Kong, there was Cathay Pacific. Australia, there was Qantas. So it seemed like South African Airways was just competing head on head with other full service carriers. So yeah, it's sad. I mean, I really enjoyed having that connectivity, but it's not been the best business model. And regarding Airlink, so Airlink has always relied on South African Airways for its ticketing in the past, but I think starting sometime this week or last week, Airlink will have its own airline code. So it won't be an SA flight, but it will be coded as whatever the new airline code is. And they will have a separate booking system. So I think they saw the writing on the wall. And Airlink is, it's been profitable. Airlink has not relied on a bank state bailout, if I remember correctly.
Fantastic. And when I was in South Africa in February to go to Antarctica, I stayed with a friend, born, raised, lived his whole life in Western Cape, and I think some years in Johannesburg as well. And he phrased it as it's paradise on earth except for the crime. And South Africa is one place that I would like to live for a few years at some point in my life. Let's close. It's way past midnight. Let's close with the Debjeet bedtime story of the wonders of South Africa, and we'll fade out.
Well, it's not past midnight. It's only 10:30, so it's not too late. I mean, I don't sleep until 1 o'clock. But the thing with South Africa is, I mean, that's a great way to describe it. I mean, I live in a city which I think has probably the best climate on earth. It's, well, one of the best climates on earth. It's like Southern California, but much cooler. Right now, we're just kind of transitioning from summer to fall. For those who do Fahrenheit, it's like 70 by day, 45 by night, so 21 and 7 Celsius. Winters are like 60 by day, 40 by night, so 16 and 4 degrees Celsius. But it's brilliantly sunny. We have these epic thunderstorms during the summer, which just, make even the warmest summer days transition into these beautiful, cool evenings where you can tuck into a duvet and, sleep sleep without a fan. I mean, I don't think I've used a fan more than a couple of times. It's incredibly, I would say, cost effective and pocket friendly. Again, a country where there's incredible inequality. It depends a lot on your privilege, but if you do have a decent income, this is one country where your money goes a long distance. Extremely diverse country. I mean, like, you name it, we probably have it. So, epic coastlines, be it the kind where the desert meets the sea, close to the Namibian border, to the epic sort of rocky mountains meeting the sea. So all the way from Cape Town to the Garden Route through Sisikama. If you want more tropical shores with white sand beaches, that's Durban and areas north and south of it. Some of the world's greatest safari reserves. We've got Africa's tallest mountains south of Kilimanjaro, so the Drakensberg Mountains, which are frequently covered with snow. Just had their first big snowfall a couple of days back. So these beautiful photos of these green valleys with snow capped, like almost like dusty ice, like a dusting of icing sugar on top of these mountains. The Kalahari Desert. It's just an insanely diverse and beautiful country. And I've lived here for 3.5 years. I've been coming here for 7 years before that. And I think it's like a country that becomes more beautiful. It's like a fine wine. It gets more and more delectable the more it ages and the more number of times I've been here. Crime is definitely one of those issues that you need to keep at the back of your head, but I will still say it's not something that it's not a constant riff in the soundtrack of my life here. So, for example, I am careful. I will not do something as half-minded as keep my iPhone 11 on the passenger seat and have the window completely pulled down. I wouldn't do something like that. I am quite careful when driving at night, but I work until midnight occasionally in my office, and I live very close to the office now. But before, I used to live about 20 minutes drive from work, and I would often drive late at night, and I didn't feel like someone was following me or stuff like that. I am careful, like when I'm entering my apartment, you use a remote control to open your gates and stuff. I'm always careful to make sure that no one's following me and stuff like that. But I also deliberately choose to live in a part of Johannesburg where there's no electric fences and people living behind high walls. So I don't know if Farkan is still on the chat, but one of my running jokes with him is that I fall asleep on this very couch right here. There's a balcony door like 5 feet from here, and I will wake up at some ridiculous hour in the morning because the door's open and it's just too cold. So I sleep with my door open at night, and it's possible, it's doable. So yes, I mean, you do need to be careful, but it's not a war zone. And and I do think a lot of tourists sort of like they basically pigeonhole South Africa as Cape Town, Kruger, and maybe something in between, and they just run in and out of Joburg like Big Bad Josie. It's just so scary and just has this terrible reputation. Like you take an Uber from the airport, if at all. You stay somewhere away from the airport. You stay in Sandton, which God, it's just like, I mean, I dislike Santon with a passion. It's just this, it's this extremely rich neighborhood with 20-foot electric fences everywhere, and they think that's Joburg. But a few people, well, quite a few people from EPS actually have been through Joburg, and we've had dinners in the inner city. Like I usually select a restaurant which is deep in the inner city. There's this fantastic Indian restaurant in the old Indian neighborhood, and we will occasionally go there for dinner. And everyone, I don't think anyone said afterwards like, ugh, like maybe we shouldn't have done that. And everyone's just been thrilled. And I've had friends who, not from EPS, but other friends who I've arm twisted to stay in Joburg for an extra day. And I said, please don't treat Joburg as a layover. Stay at my place or stay at a hotel, but give me the chance to take you around town. And they just said they loved it. I mean, there's just so much to see, so much to do. And I think, like in a country that's so unequal, not just from an economic perspective, but also from a racial perspective, like Cape Town's beautiful, but I'm sorry to say this bluntly, Cape Town's so white. Like when you go to the City Bowl, it feels like you're in Europe. Everyone of color is like, living behind the mountain. So I think it's a bit of the geography of Joburg. It's just this big flat city where there's, I think, just been a lot of more mixing between different socioeconomic and racial categories. You see a lot of more mixed race couples. You see, you see people of different socioeconomic categories mixing and having fun and enjoying themselves. And yeah, it's just like, I just love Joburg. I mean, it's this real, as we love to say, Joburg is a real African city.
Oh, fantastic. And I think Pretoria is beautiful. You've got so many sites around the city too that certainly take up Debjeet's advice and spend more time in there. I think he'll take you to dinner. He'll find bunny chow. It's a term that I just learned, and welcome you to one of the great world cities. So we've got a few comments saying you're such a rock star. They've stayed on for the entire 90 minutes. It's our longest episode ever. It's our most well attended, and incredible to have the rock star Debjeet Sen with us. Thank you, everyone. And
well, thank you. I'm most humbled. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone. And I will say this is my last sort of comment before we sign out. I mean, social media is supposed to be impersonal. It's supposed to be hollow and not real. My mother and people of her generation think like, social media is where people are just fighting. And of course, like, especially what we're seeing right now, like, COVID-19 is such a politicized affair right now, especially in America. But in this world of sort of divisions and fighting, I mean, I just love the fact that EPS, for the most part, is this beautiful oasis where we can have these calm discussions about, countries and travel. And the greatest disagreement is usually around, oh, what constitutes a country visit? And oh, is X, Y, and Z a country? And everything, it's these are like, like fun questions rather than these really bitter, nasty arguments. And I love the fact that there's so many people on EPS who have met in person and how we've become such good friends. It's very unusual. It is very unusual. And I would say that I mean this in the best possible way, but if you take a friend of mine who've known for 20 years, and I don't have much in common with them, I'd probably struggle to maintain a conversation, but I'd much rather welcome someone who I've only interacted with over Facebook or WhatsApp. And then I think like, if we had one dinner together, we just like hit it like, just it would be thick as thieves within a couple of minutes. So it's just been such an incredible resource, both for my own travels, but also for expanding my social network and for really meeting such amazing friends who I cherish and dearly love. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Take care. Thank you. Ciao.